AI in Action is brought to you by Alldus International, covering your business's staffing, consulting, and networking needs. Our host brings you the leading minds in AI, sharing their story, their success, and their advice. Focusing on fast-tracking you to the top, AI in Action cuts through the hype to help you kickstart your data science career. To listen to the latest AI in Action podcast, head over to www.alldus.com/podcast or subscribe via iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Podcasts.
Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of the Alldus podcast. I'm your host, Ben Sparks, and today we are continuing with our ServiceNow mentorship series, interviewing some of the best and brightest leaders and technical talent from across the ServiceNow ecosystem. Today, we're proud to release the first of our ServiceNow Gig Economy micro-series, shining a spotlight on some of the folks who have made a successful career from being an independent contractor in the ServiceNow marketplace. Today, we are lucky to host Eddie Goldbeck. Eddie is a ServiceNow architect and overall technologist who started in the IC marketplace back in June 2020. In this conversation, Eddie will give us an overview of his experiences, but with a focus on some of the key differences between being a contractor and a quote-unquote employee, how to position yourself as a contractor in a very competitive marketplace, such as ServiceNow, but probably some key learns for other people as well. How to approach stakeholder management, and especially under the umbrella of when people are managing multiple customers or projects. Sort of some of the most challenging things to consider when navigating the gig economy, and also some of the best parts about it as well. So Eddie, welcome to the show.
Hey, Ben, thanks for putting this together. I've really been looking forward to this conversation. How have you been?
I'm good. And it's been me too. I know since we last spoke, I've been really looking forward to getting together for this. So no, it's a great one. How are you doing?
Well, it's always a beautiful day above ground, Ben. I start every conversation with that phrase, even if I repeat it, a dozen times a day on every call. I'm not big on voodoo, but I do believe in, feeding positivity and helping to starve out negativity. It's really helpful professionally too. Folks might occasionally find it a little irritating if they're in a bad mood, but I know everybody finds constant negativity to be the opposite of attractive. So that's kind of my motto there.
We can all do with a little bit of positivity in the world. I'll take it, even if it is 14 times a day. So Eddie, look, let's tell our listeners a bit about you and what brought you here today.
I actually got started in education of all places. I worked as a special education behaviorist with the largest school district in Los Angeles, the LA Unified School District. I did it for probably about 3 years. And while it was really satisfying work and watching the kids grow and learn, education just doesn't pay the bills here in LA. At that point, I actually applied for a job as a microcomputer support specialist, which always amused me because they still had running production payloads at the time. So yeah, at LA Unified, I actually did a little bit of everything. So I did the help desk work, asset management, procurement, Active Directory and Exchange administration, you name it. It was really my baptism by fire when it came to IT. What was cool about it is I was able to put myself through school. I actually did my bachelor's degree before being laid off as part of the budget cuts in, I think it was 2012.
Right. And obviously, that must have been rough. It's something that, I'm sure a lot of people have had to deal with, over the last year or so. How did you handle that?
Funny, but I actually say losing that job was one of the best things that ever happened to me. Pretty much right after I lost that job, I landed a job in Malibu, of all places, right across from the ocean at a company called American Homes for Rent. At the time, they were a private real estate investment trust that was just growing like crazy. So American Homes for Rent was part of the Wayne Hughes real estate empire. You might be familiar with him from Public Storage. And over there at American Homes for Rent, I built from the ground up our IT operations department and led it and evolved it over the next 8 years or so. While I was there, I was in a variety of roles, again, kind of starting out in the beginning as help desk, building out the service desk, building IT operations, etc. And kind of my culmination there about 8 years later was managing 23 employees and a $3.5 million annual budget. And kind of just, professionally, obviously, is very profound for me. But more importantly, I met both my best friend and my wife at that company. So in addition to those, career successes, which I'm obviously happy about, it was a great personal success for me too.
Amazing. Well, so things turn around for you quickly and definitely for the best. And yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk ServiceNow specifically. How did you get involved with ServiceNow? Everyone seems to have a different story.
Yeah, no, that's a good question too. So ServiceNow is actually my first major organization-wide initiative at American Homes for Rent. Back when I started, we had disjointed help desk across, Spiceworks, Zendesk, email, Walkup, and of all things, SharePoint. I realized early on that if I was going to build a team that could keep up with American Homes for Rent's growth and measure them, drive continuous improvement, all of those kind of block and tackle things, I really needed to operate out of one tool, not multiple. And since, again, we had this rapidly expanding company, something like 150 hires and fires a month, I knew I'd have buy-in from our HR executives too. We evaluated several products, including consolidating into Spiceworks or Zendesk, since we already had a presence there. But after documenting and ranking our critical success factors, watching lots of sales demos, and having a few meetings with our chief executive officer and chief accounting officer, ServiceNow was declared the victor. Our account rep suggested Cloud Sherpas to do our initial implementation. And this was, again, one of those really fortunate accidents for me professionally. I got looped in with some real pros in the ServiceNow space over at Cloud Sherpas, folks like John Lind, Terry Welch, and Adrian Durai, to name a few. Pretty much between the three of them, I learned an enormous amount about ServiceNow as a product, bad practices, good practices, scripting, and most importantly, how to get unstuck when you get lost in the weeds. Super fortunate there. Kind of in the beginning, I worked a lot with the Cloud Sherpas team to gather requirements and hand it off for them to build. But over time, as I watched the demos and asked them lots of, well, how does that work? How did you do that? I began doing some of the work myself. Eventually, as my team grew and I was able to offload more of the day-to-day operations to the managers under me, I was able to start doing more of the evangelism for ServiceNow across the business, focusing on digitizing workflows for accounts payable, accounts receivable, human resources, utilities, leasing, and training, to name a few. The work I did with the IT department really helped build ServiceNow's credibility as a platform that could be counted on to capture metrics, measure them, report on team performance, etc. And then the work that I did with the business helped to show that it wasn't just an IT tool, but a great tool for workflow across the enterprise as well.
Awesome. So, we're looking at the gig economy specifically. I think it's fair to say, well, it sounds like you were on had a really good thing going on there at American Homes for Rent. While I appreciate fortune favors the brave sometimes, what was it specifically what was the tipping point that made you feel that you wanted to become a consultant?
It's funny. It's very similar to what happened to me at LA Unified. After about 7.5, 8 years and 3 promotions at American Homes for Rent, they decided they wanted to move the IT department to Las Vegas. Now, me personally, I'm a lifelong Californian. All of my family's here. My wife's family's all here. And I kind of made a decision that rather than move out to Vegas, it was time to move on from American Homes. Strangely enough, it ended up being a great move for me. It was right in the middle of COVID. It was about June 2020 when I left American Homes to start that consulting career. And, at the time, everybody was working from home, and I had just left a career where I was traveling all the time and I was always in the office. So the idea of traveling for leisure instead of work and being able to set my own schedule, not to mention skipping the LA traffic, was absolutely irresistible. So given my years of experience with ServiceNow and my deep belief in the platform itself, really becoming a ServiceNow consultant was a no-brainer. I started reaching out to everybody on my network, recruiters, past colleagues, current colleagues, you name it, posting on LinkedIn, searching Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, Upwork, Fiverr, pretty much anywhere that work was being posted. In the beginning, it was really slow going, but with every new contact, every answered questions on forums and Slack channels, 5-star reviews from the consulting sites, and new project that I completed, I found it easier and easier to find new work, and in a few, again, very fortunate cases, some consistent repeat business. Honestly, I couldn't be happier doing the consulting thing full time.
Amazing. And Eddie, it definitely seems like you've made the best out of every opportunity that's happened to you, even the ones that are slightly outside of your control. A lot of what you've just spoke about there sounds like a bit of a balancing act. And I can imagine that is part of being a contractor. If we look at your skill set and the role you've chosen as an architect, maybe you could what made you go that route, and maybe you could give us a bit more of an overview about that, because you're a technologist overall, but what was it about being an architect contractor that you really sort of honed in on?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one too. I've always been fascinated in how things work and how they fit together. When I was little, I used to take stuff apart and then try to put it back together. Most of the time, it still worked. I was the kid who spent countless hours building model kits, castles, spaceships, robots, Legos, you name it, I built it. The other thing, and this is a little bit of nerd cred for me, I was actually top 2% in the world at League of Legends for a little while there. And so min-maxing, continuous improvement, all of those kind of skills that go into that, I was using those routinely, right? Looking for opportunities to streamline processes, make gradual but continual improvements. Those were all a big part of those activities. And I think they've transitioned really well into technology broadly and into my ServiceNow career specifically.
And I'm really happy to hear that at least most of the things you took apart came back together again. So it sounds like your it sounds like your hobbies fit right into your career choices. So was there anything else you'd like to add about that?
Yeah, I guess just, kind of one other thing is I think there's a certain element of everything you do kind of helping you or hindering you. And I think, building model kits, breaking model kits, building things, what have you, they really help drive your problem solving skills and building your tenacity, right? I think now as an adult, I've never given up on something that I really wanted. And I think that's a skill that takes time to develop.
Love it. I love the way you're looking at it. So if we were to look at ServiceNow specifically, why specifically a ServiceNow architect? Why not a developer or administrator?
The main thing is I'd already been working kind of as a process architect or a system architect previously. Kind of at American Homes Front, I was always looking for opportunities to improve the business. And this led me to have conversations around processes and systems at, the frontline worker level, mid-level manager level, and the executive level. And again, going back to my exceptional good luck, I was able to understand how the whole business and how the IT department operated. And this was a great experience for my new career as a ServiceNow architect and evangelist for the ServiceNow product, because I can always refer back to my time on the other side of the table, not just as a consultant, but actually as the person consuming those consulting services.
And as we said before, you've been doing the consulting gig for about a year now. What are the biggest differences you've seen between being a contractor and an employee? You've obviously sort of been both sides of the fence. So I'm really interested in your experience so far, especially with being sort of fairly fresh.
Yeah, so key differences, there's a lot of them. Some of the ones that really are top of mind, number one, you actually are your own boss. You can pick who you want to work with. You can pick what you're willing to work for. And you can work as much or as little as you want, finances permitting. This is something that it's a level of freedom that you don't really appreciate until you have, especially having come from the corporate leadership world where 60 to 80 hours a week was a thing. The other thing that's really big for me, especially as a provider for my wife and my kids, is I don't really worry about losing a job. When you're an employee, generally you only have one. So if you lose it, that's a big deal. Now, if you're like me, you're a consultant, juggling multiple clients, if you lose one job out of 6, it's not as bad as losing one job out of 1. So that's a really huge one too. On the taxes, so you have to pay your taxes quarterly. So you have to be really careful about tracking not just your income and where it comes from. So, if you're working a W-2 and some 1099 stuff, you have to track it separate. But you also need to track your expenses. And importantly, there's no human resources staff, payroll, accounts payable, or accounts receivable staff for you to learn on. You either have to figure it out on your own, or you got to pay somebody to help you out. And I guess maybe one of the last ones, really, unless you're paying for a separate office, there is no office to go to. Now, for me personally, I've got a couple of young kids. They're 2 and 3. It's great not having to go to the office. There's no commute. I don't have to dress up. I don't have to be away from my family. It's something that you can't really put a price on. And that's one of the really awesome things about consulting.
Nice. Yeah, we're seeing the same, and definitely that kind of work-life balance. And as people are kind of also looking at, navigating what the new or the next normal looks like from a work perspective, these are all conversations people are having at home, I'm sure. So look, it sounds pretty positive overall. How do you position yourself as a contractor? And I'm really thinking that, look, it is a competitive space out there. You're fairly fresh, not as an architect, but definitely in the contracting market. So, how are you positioning yourself to win the gigs?
Yeah. So I think this one really depends on, your personality and your experience. There seems to be more than enough work for everyone out there in the ecosystem, but it really depends on what you're looking for. So for me personally, I pitch myself as someone who's done a little bit of everything in IT and also inside of ServiceNow. And I have a successful track record that I can lean on for building and running IT organizations, both from the ground up and already existing ones. With that comes exposure to really every major group in IT. So support, operations, identity management, asset management, compliance, governance, leadership, networking, development applications, you name it, I've done it.
So kind of jack of all trades?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good way to describe me. I definitely now have some real focus areas, and my bread and butter for my income as a consultant is ServiceNow advisory and consulting. Mm-hmm. But as you know, I also do a little bit of ghostwriting for managed services providers, other consulting firms. I do some ServiceNow training as part of the Next Gen program. And I also consult smaller IT organizations and companies with their IT ops architecture and leadership as well. This actually gives me a lot of work to choose from, which helps keep me busy and also helps keep my tools from getting dull. But more importantly, what I really sell is someone who's going to go out there and figure it out with a positive attitude.
So speaking of selling your services, when you're interviewing, there's obviously multiple people. What are you selling as the Eddie brand? What are you going to market with to make sure that, you are achieving the end goal, which is getting the job after an interview?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So number one is obviously confidence, right? Confidence. And then probably number two is authenticity. I know these sound, like super cheesy buzzwords that everybody throws around, but I do really believe it. If you speak confidently as your authentic self, it'll show, right? Confidence, honesty, positivity, these are all infectious traits. And if you really believe you're a great fit for the role, chances are your client will too. You could be the most knowledgeable ServiceNow developer on the planet, but I won't hire you if you don't seem sure of yourself or you come across as disingenuous.
It's really interesting when we look at feedback. I think some people always think that they have to have all the skills for the role. A lot of clients would prefer authenticity over, people trying to, feel like they have to answer a question. So I think, one of the things our clients are saying is just have people just say, hey, no, I don't have that experience, but I do have this. So I think that all falls into being authentic in your interviews.
Completely agree.
Anything else that you'd add?
Yeah, I guess the other thing that I would really advise folks, especially when they're starting out in their consulting career, don't try to win the contracts by being the cheapest option, right? Anybody who's been on the client side of the table knows that the best value for their money is what matters, not the lowest bid. More importantly, if you're consistently undervaluing yourself, you're going to miss out on more interesting opportunities and, of course, hurt your bottom line.
So what are some of the most challenging things that you've had to deal with navigating the gig economy?
That's an easy one. The most challenging part about being a contractor is the whole feast and famine concept of finding work. It's really become a recurring theme for me. But I've been fortunate that after, again, the first month or so of hunting, I got looped in with several long-term repeat customers. But even with that repeat work, you need to constantly be searching for new opportunities and, more importantly, closing them.
And when you have multiple customers, which you spoke about earlier, how are you handling those?
It's a balancing act for sure. My secret weapon is keeping notes on paper. I keep a separate notepad for every client. I also have an Excel file where I tally the data for each day. And what this does is it helps me keep, really loss to a minimum by doing that double entry. And it also helps ensure that when the client asks where I'm spending my time or how I'm spending it, I'm well prepared to answer that question. Unfortunately, more than a few times, I've found myself working 4 a.m. to 10 o'clock at night to meet milestones I have agreed to. I've also woken up at midnight to take classes in GMT 0, the UK time zone, before doing a full day shift in my Eastern time zone gig, and then teaching a class at night on Pacific time. Now, I'm not encouraging anyone to or not to work these kinds of crazy hours, but don't forget to make time for your family, sleeping, eating, all of that. It can be a challenge. But what I will say is that you should, A, carefully track your time, both for what you're doing for your customers and for yourself, and B, eliminate any unnecessary or unproductive habits. And what I like to call those is anything that pays $0 per hour or doesn't involve quality time with your family and friends. Especially as you're looking to grow your solopreneurship, until you start pulling in some extra people to help out, got to be super cognizant of that.
Definitely, and I really appreciate your candidness there. I think it sounds like a lot to manage, and obviously, I think there's probably different folks out there. Some that are probably more built towards those kind of opportunities where they're scheduling their work, and others that are probably more standard 40 hours a week. But I think it's really just down to that individual to take pieces from that what they will. Look, there must be some upsides. So, what are the best things about being a contractor?
Yeah. So again, the number one thing is probably being able to spend the time you want with your family and your friends, because you make your own schedule, right? You got to be careful, again, like we just talked about. Don't overbook yourself, right? But at the same time, if hey, this Friday I want to be completely offline because we're going to go up, we're going to go up to Big Bear, we're going to go to Mammoth, what have you, you can do that, right? You get to make those decisions. Number two, especially true for anyone in leadership roles where you're working 60, 80 hours a week, you get paid as a consultant for every hour you work, not just the first 40. If you want to work 40 hours, you can schedule yourself that way. If you want to work 80, you can, but you're going to get paid for every hour, not just the straight salaried 40. So that's a big one too. And again, you don't have to keep all your eggs in one basket, right? You can work for as many or as few customers as you like. You're not tied to one employer unless you have a special contract. And that just gives you a lot of flexibility and comfort, knowing if you lose one of your 6 or however many gigs you have, it's not your whole livelihood.
Overall, sounds like you're really happy with it all, and it really fits with your lifestyle as well. Looking back, to Eddie, 5-10 years ago, what advice would you give to your younger self?
There's probably 3 main points that I'd really hone in on. Number one, I'd say get started consulting earlier. Being in IT leadership, I saw the bills we paid for consultants, and I knew I wanted in on that action. But I was really concerned that I wouldn't be able to reproduce my 40-hour-a-week income. You don't need 40 hours of consulting work in your pipeline to get started. Just do it on the side. Do it now. Just start, right? Do it for the challenge, and the money will follow. That's the biggest piece of advice I'd give. Second, spend more time getting certified. When you're working for an organization, I think there seems to be less drive towards, getting trained and certified and things of that nature. Once you're in the consulting space, those pieces of paper really, really matter, right? So definitely spend more time getting certified, not just doing the work. And then lastly, and this really applies not just to consulting, but regular W-2 roles too, don't be afraid to ask for more money than you're willing to accept. This I attribute more than anything else to the earnings that I currently command. And if I had known this before and been a little better informed and maybe a little more aggressive early on in my career, it would have certainly made my bank account happier.
Sounds like great advice to me.
Yeah, well, it's funny because people are statistically better at giving advice than following it. And I just hope that when I give the same advice to my kids, they take it to heart. It's a while before I got to worry about that, though.
I'm the same. If you ever look at one of my weekly planned agendas, I'm definitely not good at taking my own advice. So look, Eddie, look, this has been great. You've given us a lot of different sort of facets of your journey so far, and it's really just sort of kicking off in the contract market. So any other sort of parting pieces of wisdom you'd like to give our listeners before we close out?
Yeah, definitely. There's one thing, and I recommend this to everyone, regardless of the context. Make time to read, right? Or listen to audiobooks. That works too. And if you're going to read just 3 books this year, make them The Richest Man in Babylon, Think and Grow Rich, and Rich Dad, Poor Dad. All 3 of those were completely life-changing for me. Go get them. Go get them right now. It'll cost less than the cost of a trip to the movies, and I promise you will get value out of them immediately.
You're the second person that actually in the last 2 weeks to recommend Rich Dad Poor Dad to me. So yeah, I'm definitely going to pick up that one. And anything else before we close out?
Well, I guess just lastly, if you want to connect with me, check out my website, goldbecktechnology.com. That's Golf Oscar Lima Delta Bravo Echo Charlie Kilo technology.com. Or just find me on LinkedIn. I'm looking forward to hearing from you.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Eddie. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Ben.
AI in Action is brought to you by Alldus International, covering your business's staffing, consulting, and networking needs. Alldus offer an exec search program. Alldus can help you discover how data science and AI can transform your company. With our unrivaled network of C-suite executives and senior AI professionals, we offer retained search services across the US and Europe. Get the Alldus advantage. Become a member of the Alldus community and enjoy some of the following: AI meetups. Once a month, our community gathers to listen to some of the leading experts in the world of data science and AI. Our speakers come from all over the world, including Dublin, Boston, and Frankfurt. We also have our AI mentors. Our experts will provide mentoring to Alldus members. And don't forget our AI in Action podcast. Each week, we have guests from all over the world talking us through their education, career, and more. Become an Alldus member and get the Alldus advantage. For more information and to sign up for our newsletter, log on to www.alldus.com. That's www.alldus.com. Alldus International, empowering through AI.